What's up, everybody? We are just 1 week away from the NFL draft. It is absolutely crazy. We're only 1 week. I've been trying to, get some NFL content out, some Bengals content, some players the Bengals should draft, shouldn't draft, some of the most underrated, overrated prospects. In this video, I'm going to kind of be going more in detail about the most underrated, most overrated prospects. I have a couple prospects here for most underrated and overrated. Let's go ahead and get into it here. So looking at underrated, there's several players here. One of them is West Kentucky wide receiver Malachi Corley. And I don't think Malachi Corley is as underrated as he was just a couple of months ago. He's really starting to pick up steam. I think he's one of the best wide receivers in this year's draft. I mean, he has 180 receptions the last 2 years, 22 touchdowns the last 2 years. He is absolutely incredible when the ball is in his hands. The last 3 years, he has over 2,000 yards after the catch. He's called the Yak King for a reason. He is so explosive. He's invaded or broke 77 tackles the last 3 years at a second in the FBS. He reminds me a lot of Deebo Samuel, and I think he's probably going to go top 40, top 45 range. Honestly, as we get closer to the draft, I would not be completely shocked if the Chiefs maybe even took Corley with the 32nd pick overall. I might be higher than Corley than some people, but I like Corley a lot here. And despite him getting more, national recognition here recently, I still think he is severely underrated and one of the better players in this year's draft. So another underrated player here, that is Marshall running back Rasheen Ali. I've talked about Ali a lot this draft season. I think he's one of the best running backs. I think he's one of the most underrated players in this year's draft. He had 1,400 rushing yards his freshman year in 2021. He led the NCAA in rushing touchdowns in 2021, his freshman season. He had 23 rushing touchdowns in 2021. This past season, he had 1,100 rushing yards to go along with 15 rushing touchdowns. And, something about Corley and Rasheen Ali, they're playing at smaller schools. Marshall is in the Sun Belt, and Western Kentucky is in Conference USA. And one thing I hate about, the kind of knock and, the negative about both of these players here is that, they've not played against, big competition. I think that is a ridiculous and just stupid excuse for Ali and Corley. Ali played against Ali played against Virginia Tech this past season, and Ali had 174 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns when Marshall played Virginia Tech. So when Ali's given the chance to play against big competition, he's played very, very well. And when you watch Ali play, I don't think he does anything like absolutely amazing. I think he does just everything so well. The more I watch him play, he's very comparable to Saquon Barkley, the newest running back for the Philadelphia Eagles. He's so explosive and elusive in the way he runs. He's just very, very comparable to Barkley, in my opinion. Ali tore his bicep tendon the week of the Senior Bowl. He was really having a good Senior Bowl practice week, but that really kind of affected his draft stock a little bit there. If I'm a team, I'm definitely taking a late round flyer on him. It's a low risk, extremely, extremely high reward. And, when you're looking at running backs throughout the NFL, there's normally a running back or two every single year who is a late round pick, or maybe even undrafted who, turns out very well in the NFL. Aaron Jones was I believe, a late round pick from UTEP. He turned out to be very well for the Packers. Austin Eckler was undrafted. So I really think Ali has what it takes to be one of the better, late round running backs in this year's draft. As we continue here, those were two of the underrated players here. Another underrated player is Troy running back Kamani Vidal. He had 1,600 rushing yards this past season, 14 rushing touchdowns, 5.6 yards per carry. He also had 18 receptions for 200 yards and a receiving touchdown. Vidal playing at Troy, Ali playing at Marshall. These were running backs who they didn't really get the credit they deserve because they're playing in such a small conference in the Sun Belt. But Vidal, I've seen lots of mocks have him go undrafted, and I've seen big boards have him be around the 250 range. So if he gets drafted, he'll be one of the last picks. Vidal, just like Ali, I think it's worth taking a late round flyer on him. I think he has potential to be a pretty nice late round pick, regardless of where he goes. A couple other players here for underrated. Another very, very underrated player is Joshua Cephas, the wide receiver from UTSA. A couple weeks ago, I think I did a YouTube short talking about Cephas, just kind of briefly, but Cephas is extremely underrated. 89 receptions this past season, 1,100 receiving yards this past year for the Roadrunners to go along with 10 touchdowns. Over half of his yards last season were yards after the catch. That's very, very good. Also, when you look at Cephas, he is just one of two wide receivers who are draft eligible to have a drop percentage of 0% from this past season. Joshua Cephas is one, and the other is Alabama wide receiver Jermaine Burton, who's also a very, very underrated receiver as well. And something about Cephas, I don't know this for a fact, but I would say he's the only player. I don't know this for certain, but he's had 800 receiving yards each of the last 3 seasons. That's something that not a lot of receivers can say. He's been very consistent. He's progressed and got better every single year with the Roadrunners. And, I think Cephas is a late-round guy. I know Cincinnati has kind of had some interest, and Cephas had a visit with Cincinnati. So hopefully maybe the Bengals get Cephas there. But another underrated player, I don't have him listed on here, but is Cephas's teammate, DeCorian Clark, the wide receiver from UTSA. He's also another underrated wide receiver to watch out here when it comes to day 3 picks. As we continue here, I got one more underrated player, and that is Virginia wide receiver Malik Washington. I do not know why. I do not understand this at all. The lack of media coverage that Malik Washington is getting is absurd. It is so crazy to me. He's one of the best wide receivers in this year's draft, and people aren't even talking about him. It's so crazy. He had 110 receptions this past season for Virginia. He had 1,426 yards, 13 yards per catch, and 9 touchdowns. He was number 1 in the country in receptions. He was number 1 in the ACC in receiving yards, and he was 4th in the NCAA in receiving yards. He was absolutely beast. He was absolute beast this season for Virginia. The one knock on Malik Washington is he's only 5'8". That is a slight concern, but I still think you have to take a chance on him. He's had the most missed tackles this past season. He broke 35 tackles this past season. That leads all wide receivers who are draft eligible. He broke 35 tackles, more than anybody. More than Marvin Harrison Jr., more than Corley, more than Malik Neighbors, anybody. So Malik Washington, to me, the wide receiver from Virginia, is just not really getting enough credit he deserves. I think he's one of the best wide receivers in this year's draft. He's projected to go rounds 3 or 4. Honestly, I think it should go a little bit higher, but Malik Washington is somebody, if your team's looking for a mid-round wide receiver, I don't really think you can get better than Malik Washington. I'm feeling that Cade Stover is underrated and that he could be our tight end in the future. Cincinnati, when you're looking at tight end, we have pick 80, 97, and 115. I would maybe, if he's there at 115, I would take him. I think 80 is too early. I think 97, there's still going to be maybe better prospects available. But Stover, that would not be a bad pickup. Maybe a guy like Eric All, the tight end from Iowa as well. So that was some of the most underrated players. Here are just a couple of the most overrated prospects, in my opinion, in this year's draft. Starting with Georgia offensive tackle Amarius Mims. I know, most of my viewers are Bengal fans, and I got kind of lots of hate, as I expected, by saying I did not want Cincinnati to get Amarius Mims. I think Mims is a really, really good player. You watch his film, he's great. He only has 8 starts, only 803 career snaps. I think that is a major concern, regardless what team drafts him, Cincinnati, Dallas, Green Bay, whoever. That's a major concern in my opinion. When you look at him, 800 snaps, and then you look at a guy like Patrick Paul, who has 2,900 snaps. Joe Alt has 2,200. J.C. Latham has 1,800. So Mims does not have the experience compared to some of these other, top offensive tackle prospects. He only has 8 starts, and he had ankle surgery this past season. I just think it's very, very risky for any team to draft Mims who does not have a lot of experience. And I think he's a great player, like I said, but I just kind of think it's more of a risk than a reward. I think that there's more cons than pros for drafting Amarius Mims in round one. I mean, round two, I totally get it, but I just don't really get the hype with Amarius Mims. I've kind of briefly talked about this. This is a player I do not want Cincinnati to get. And honestly, I think this probably might be the most overrated player in this year's draft. I don't know why anybody would want this player in the first round. And that is Florida State wide receiver Keon Coleman. If you are a wide receiver needy team, in my opinion, I think you stay away from Keon Coleman. I think you take a guy like Ricky Pearsall or Malachi Corley in round two, maybe even a guy like Jermaine Burton in round three, then taking a early second round pick or maybe even a late first round pick on Keon Coleman. I just don't think he's going to be good. I mean, he had 50 receptions this past season for 658 yards with 11 touchdowns. In one game, he had 9 receptions for 122 yards and 3 touchdowns. That is a monster performance. That is a great game. But you have to look at the fact 20 to 25% of his production just came off one game alone. I just don't think he's that good. He's slow. He does not create separation compared to some of these other players. He reminds me a lot of Kelvin Benjamin, another Florida State wide receiver. And when you watch Keon Coleman, like I said, he's slow. There were 30 wide receivers invited to the NFL Combine. Keon Coleman ranked 29th out of 30 when it came to the 40-yard dash for wide receivers. He ran a 40-yard dash in 4.61 seconds. I just do not get the hype with Keon Coleman at all. I would stay away from him pretty much at all costs. I would rather draft a wide receiver in round 3 than draft Coleman in round 2. So we got one more overrated player here. Talking about some of the most underrated players, talking about some of the most overrated players in this year's draft. And this player here, this is another player I just don't really get why he's so high on people's big boards, people's mock drafts. And that is Michigan quarterback J.J. McCarthy. I just don't see what's so great about him. He's a really, really good game manager, but when you watch his games, he does nothing great. Like his deep ball is okay, his accuracy is okay, but I mean, that's it. He doesn't wow you with his film or his game compared to a guy like, Caleb Williams or even a guy like Michael Penix Jr., who realistically, McCarthy's probably going to be drafted higher than Penix Jr. But, there's lots of mocks having McCarthy go in the top 10. But when you watch McCarthy play, like I said, he's a game manager. If you're drafting a quarterback in the top 10, he needs to be a quarterback who can lead your team to the Super Bowl, who can really elevate your team. I don't think McCarthy is that guy. I think he was very fortunate being on a great Michigan team the past couple of seasons. And, 2,900 passing yards this past season for Michigan, 22 touchdowns, 4 picks. I just don't really see the hype in McCarthy. Obviously, you take Caleb Williams. I would take Williams, May, Penix Jr., several other quarterbacks before I would J.J. McCarthy. In the second or third round, I could get it, but mocks of him being in the top 10, I just think it's absolutely ridiculous. It kind of shows how desperate teams are to try to find their quarterback of the future. But talking about most underrated prospects, talking about most overrated prospects, that really about does it. We are just 1 week away from the NFL draft. Comment some players who you think are underrated, and comment some players who you think are overrated in this year's NFL draft. That about does it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you're new to the channel or seen videos before, make sure to like this video and subscribe to my channel. And I will see you all next time on the Sports Behind Show.